This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. The Canada Revenue Agency wants former Winnipeg Chief Administrative Officer, that's CAO, Phil Schegel, and his company FSS to pay taxes on bribe money. The I-Team's Caroline Bargout explains.
The Canada Revenue Agency says in 2011, Phil Schegel's consulting company FSS received a $200,000 check from a company controlled by Armic Babakanians, the contractor hired to build the Winnipeg Police Headquarters. Now the CRA says FSS and Schegel should have paid taxes on it. In April, Schegel and his company filed an appeal in the Tax Court of Canada, saying the money was never theirs in the first place because it was part of a $327,200 land deal between Babakanians and two American companies owned by Schegel and former Winnipeg Mayor Sam Cates. Schegel said $100,000 was owed to Winnix, one of his Arizona companies, while the other half was owed to Duddy, an Arizona company owned by Cates. A Manitoba court has ordered Schegel to pay back the bribe. He's appealing that decision. The tax case is before the courts. Schegel's lawyer declined to comment. Caroline Bargout, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A new poll shows Sean Loney is making gains, but Glenn Murray remains well ahead of the field in the race to be Winnipeg's next mayor. The Probe Research poll was conducted for the Winnipeg Free Press and CTV. It says Glenn Murray has a 2-to-1 advantage over his nearest rivals at 40% of decided voters. Scott Gillingham has 15%, and Loney has jumped to 14%. That's more than double the percentage of decided voters he had in the last poll in July. Kevin Klein is fourth with 10%. Jenny Motkaluk and Rana Bakari are at 4% and 3% respectively. The remaining candidates took less than 1% of decided voter support. These candidates who want to be Winnipeg's next mayor are gathering at the University of Manitoba tonight. They've all been invited to share their plans for the environment. CBC's Cameron McLean is on campus and he joins us now live. What can people expect to hear this evening, Cam?
The event's been organized by 26 different environmental groups, and they've asked the candidates to share what they would do to protect Winnipeg's environment. Topics include how to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050, enhancing green spaces, Winnipeg transit, and electric vehicles.
Now, we did hear some promises from some of the candidates earlier today. What did they have to say?
A lot of the promises touched on environmental issues. Sean Loney says he'd like to hook up 40,000 Winnipeg homes to geothermal heating by 2030. The city would focus on new developments and homes where the existing natural gas pipes are reaching the end of their life.
In those situations, we feel Winnipeggers can have ground source heat pump heating their homes at or below competitive costs for natural gas.
Loney says that the city would pay upfront costs and homeowners would pay a monthly fee. Jenny Motkaluk says she'd like to double the number of trees the city of Winnipeg plants every year.
And we're no longer keeping up with replacing all the trees that come down. In fact, in 2021, only 19% of the trees that we lost were replaced. And in fact, there are 14,500 missing trees today that need replacing, and the backlog at City Hall goes up by 2,000 trees every year.
Candidate Rick Shawn also made a green pledge. He would allow homeowners to switch from grass to natural lawns. He would also create incentives to convert surface parking to green spaces. And Rana Bakari also revived a pledge by outgoing Mayor Brian Bowman. She would reopen Portage and Main to pedestrians.
So who are we expecting to hear from tonight, Cameron?
Well, organizers say 10 out of the 11 mayoral candidates have said that they would be here. Kevin Klein said he had a prior engagement.
Thanks very much for this, Cam. CBC's Cameron McLean reporting live tonight from the University of Manitoba. Remember, CBC Manitoba will host a live Winnipeg mayoral debate on October 19th. That's 1 week before the civic election. It will be an opportunity for you to learn more about those who may just become Winnipeg's next mayor and where they stand on the issues most important to you. This live debate will air at 6 p.m. here on CBC Television and CBC Radio. It will also be streamed on our website, on CBC Gem, and on CBC Manitoba's Facebook page. Now, right across the country, cannabis retail store closures are becoming more and more noticeable. They're prompting some to ask if the market has reached its saturation point. Austin Grabish takes a look.
Spinning ahead with the acquisition of 3 new stores. Delta 9 now has 38 locations across Canada. The company planning to acquire more stores from smaller players in the next 6 months.
We personally feel Canadian cannabis and the retail segment is now reaching a point of saturation.
In Manitoba, there are more licensed cannabis stores than Tim Hortons. In a highly competitive market, CEO John Arbuthnot says red tape, high tax, and low margins make it hard to be profitable and enticing for smaller stores to sell out to bigger companies. The doors are closed at this cannabis store here in Winnipeg. It's just one of several retailers to shut down in this city in recent months and part of a larger trend across Canada. From Winnipeg to Toronto, it doesn't take long to find a former store for lease or a notice of default. The trend has companies reevaluating where they open stores. Fire and Flower has shut down 11 locations across Canada. And with the potential of federal legalization in the U.S., the company is eyeing an expansion south.
There's more to come in this ride, and what we've shown is our ability to adapt.
Cannabis analyst David Brown says a lot of people thought legalization would be a windfall, but didn't realize how fierce the market would be. Still, he sees great success amid the doom and gloom facing some.
We are seeing a few closing, but the number opening is still much higher than those closing.
Back in Winnipeg, Delta 9 CEO says the industry is still young. He sees potential for growth.
We are also obviously active in terms of consolidation, some more mergers and acquisitions.
But in a market this fierce, small independent stores may find it tough to survive. Austin Grabish, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A top Manitoba healthcare official says Indigenous people continue to face racism at the hands of the medical system. And she says we're working to fix it. The CBC's Ian Fraser reports.
This admission from a healthcare leader is rare, that the system perpetuated racism against Indigenous people in the past and present. Helga Bryant is in charge of the health authority in northern Manitoba.
Let me begin by acknowledging that Indigenous-specific racism has existed and continues to be present within the Northern Health Region. On behalf of our staff, I offer a humble, heartfelt apology. We are truly sorry for the harm this has caused.
Brian's words follows her signing of a declaration Monday in Thompson to eradicate all Indigenous-specific racism in the healthcare system. Other partners in this agreement are Manitoba, Kiiwetinoong, Okimakanak, and Kiiwetinoong, Innu, Manoa-Yawin. They'll measure their progress toward their goals by talking to Indigenous patients. The parties say they will do what it takes to eliminate racism. This includes changing systems, organizational structures, and attitudes. Ian Fraser, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A 30-year-old man who admitted attacking 3 women and a teenage girl along Winnipeg's river trails last spring and summer was sentenced today. Jordan Andrew Bruyere will spend 14 years in prison, minus the time he's already spent behind bars. The provincial court judge called it a horrific and tragic case. Bruyere pleaded guilty last month. Today in court, he apologized to his victims. The Crown and defense attorneys agreed to the joint recommendation of 14 years, less time served, in part because Bruyere himself was abused as a teenager. A 45-year-old motorcyclist from Winnipeg was killed this weekend when he hit mud on a highway northeast of Steinbach. The man was driving ahead of 5 other motorcyclists when he lost control. He'd driven into mud, lost control, and then was thrown from his bike. He was then hit by an eastbound pickup truck. The man was pronounced dead at the scene. No other injuries were reported. The Prime Minister's office announced a new independent senator from Manitoba today to fill the vacancy left by Marie Sinclair's retirement. Dr. Fleur-de-Lys Gigi Osler is an internationally renowned surgeon who operates in Winnipeg. She is an assistant professor at the University of Manitoba and a dedicated advocate for equity, diversion, and inclusion. Bill Blakey, a longtime Manitoba NDP MP, has died. Blakey's career spanned more than 30 years in both federal and provincial politics. He left a lasting impact on progressive politics in this country. He died in Winnipeg Saturday after a battle with kidney cancer and was 71 years old. Cameron McIntosh has more.
At 6'6", Bill Blakey wasn't just tall in stature. He was a giant of the social democratic movement. Conviction rooted in his faith and the blue-collar Winnipeg rail yard neighborhoods he represented.
I have a strong commitment to making sure that working people don't get forgotten.
First elected in 1979, Blakey served federally until 2008. He never sat in cabinet, but as an opposition critic, held successive Liberal and Conservative governments to task.
How long will the minister procrastinate while Medicare suffocates from violation of its basic principles?
We shall come out of this convention with a new leader.
It was Tommy Douglas in 1971 that drew Blakey to the NDP. He saw his own faith and values reflected in the NDP's Prairie Christian roots. Blakey was also an ordained minister of the United Church.
His legacy stands for itself.
Former Liberal Cabinet Minister Lloyd Axworthy was a fellow Manitoba MP. He says behind the scenes, Blakey influenced a lot of decision-making.
He was a very able practitioner of the political craft, but also had a very strong set of principles and beliefs that back that up.
We will not rest.
He didn't have a reputation for seeking the spotlight, but in 2003, he did seek the NDP leadership.
I believe Canadians are ready not just for a social democratic conscience in Parliament, well, that is a worthy role, but also for a Prime Minister who is a social democrat.
He was edged out by Jack Layton, who tapped Blakey and his experience to be House Leader. He'd go on to be Deputy Speaker. In a 2007 Maclean's poll, Blakey was voted best MP by other MPs.
I actually try and talk to people. Like, I don't assume that because they belong to other parties that they're evil or stupid.
Bill Blakey passed away in Winnipeg after a long battle with cancer. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Meteorologist John Sauder joins us now. Sauder, is it Sauder? See, my tongue is frozen because, you know, it's going to get so cold and frosty.
Yes, it is going to get frosty tonight. And, you know, this happens to Janet's mouth when we get a frost warning.
It's true. It's from all the crying because I know winter is coming.
Frost advisory is actually the correct term. Now, it's not just a risk of frost. It's frost likely tonight. And I'll show you where, right here on this map. The blue shaded area, anywhere through the Interlake and out onto the east side of Lake Winnipeg, from Portage la Prairie out to the east and right into northwestern Ontario. So this includes the Red River Valley, Winnipeg. These areas, we're looking at temperatures tonight close to 0 to -1, maybe even a few -2s out there. Right now, not bad. We got to 16 today. We're at 15 now. Dew points are really low, so it is a dry air mass. Northeast winds never got stronger than about 15, but now we sit at 11 kilometers per hour and the pressure's falling. There was a little bit of cloud out there and a few showers just to the north of us, running right now through the Gimli area or just north of there, Hecla. Some of this not even reaching the ground, just a kind of a dark cloud drifting by with maybe a little bit of wispiness just below it. So, yeah, a few raindrops certainly. And that cloud that was over Winnipeg is cleared out now. So we are heading into a clear night tonight, thanks to high pressure at the surface, kind of pushing in from the west here, and to keep us clear into the morning hours. That's really when the frost happens. The temperatures our lowest just before sunrise. Tomorrow in the morning, a little bit of cloud across the north, but I think generally either a sun-cloud mix or just all-out sunshine. And look at the position of this high in the afternoon. That means winds will be very light. Sunshine temperatures, a seasonal 15 here in Winnipeg. Even warmer out towards areas like Brandon, Dauphin, more like 18 degrees. Swan River at 20. And off into Saskatchewan, we're looking at temps in the mid to upper 20s, especially western Saskatchewan. I'll show you why in a second. But as this high moves off Wednesday out to the east of us, clockwise flow around it, so it makes sense, a southerly flow. And then there's a little bit of a trough that's kind of pushing that stubborn high out of the way. Bit of a squeeze play here, so the pressure gradient tightens up, and that means that we will see some gusty winds on Wednesday, and then an afternoon sun-cloud mix. Might see a few darker clouds mixed in with that, but I'm not expecting showers. And then after that, we are back into sunshine and really starting to warm up in that southerly flow. This is the upper ridge that's in place, so it just moves right across the eastern prairies. We get a little bit cooler as we head into the weekend, but not much cooler and still above seasonal. -1 in Winnipeg tonight. Frosty, 2 degrees by about 8 a.m., so we do make a quick recovery. Light winds, sunshine 15 tomorrow. Beautiful day to get outside for this time of year. And then in that southerly flow, 20 degrees on Wednesday, more of a sun-cloud mix, and then low 20s for Thursday and Friday in sunshine. Should be very, very nice to end off this work week.
The weather update is brought to you by Home Equip, your trusted local source for Pride Mobility scooters. From sales to rental and repair, our team is here to serve you.
Imagine finding out you could have lost your Canadian citizenship because you missed a deadline to reaffirm it, and now you could be deported. Or having a baby overseas who isn't considered Canadian even though you are. One of the pieces of legislation coming before Parliament this fall is meant to help some of these so-called lost Canadians. But as Karen Pauls explains, it doesn't address other groups caught in confusing sections of the Citizenship Act.
Pete Giesbrecht has lived in Manitoba most of his life. He's voted, paid taxes, and had a Canadian passport. But in 2015, he was summoned to the local police station and told he was going to be deported.
They said, no, actually, you have 30 days to leave the country. And if you do not leave willingly, we will fly you out with bracelets and all.
Giesbrecht is a landscaper now, but back then he was a commercial truck driver, crossing the Manitoba-U.S. border more than 100 times a year. He even had a card certifying he'd been pre-cleared to use special customs lanes.
And you never had a problem at the border?
Never, not one time.
Confused? You're not the only one. This case is known as the age 28 rule. Ever since 1977, second-generation Canadians born abroad have had an automatic right to citizenship, but they had to meet certain conditions and they had to apply to retain it before they turned 28. They automatically and unknowingly lost status if they missed that deadline.
I am simply asking the government to fulfill the promises that they have given to us.
In 2009, the federal government tried to fix that, but those amendments created even more problems.
The government only corrected it for those people who had not yet turned 28 years of age. If you'd already lost your citizenship, you were out.
New legislation coming before Parliament is meant to naturalize people like Giesbrecht, who fell into that crack. Bill S-245 has already been passed by the Senate.
There are thousands of people, actually many thousands of people in Canada that are affected and might still not know it, and this will make it so they are whole, that as though they never lost their citizenship.
But there is another category of lost Canadians this bill won't help, even if it is passed.
The storm moves this way, so boom, boom.
In Nagoya, Japan, Victoria Maruyama is fighting to have Canada recognize her children as citizens. She is Canadian, was raised in Alberta, went to UBC. But because she and her children were born outside of Canada, her kids don't automatically become Canadians. This is called the second-generation cutoff rule.
The shock of it, like, oh my God, I am not Canadian enough. That was a shock.
The children have lived in Canada for a total of 3 years. Maruyama has applied for citizenship and immigration for them, but they've been rejected because Ottawa said they couldn't prove a substantial connection to Canada.
Like grandparents, like helped build the stupid railroad. It makes me really angry.
She wants to move home.
That's where our family is, and we want to go back. Like, I have to go back. My mom's not getting any younger, and neither is my stepdad, so we're going to need to be there.
Maruyama and 6 other families are part of a constitutional challenge filed by Toronto lawyer Sujit Chowdhury.
What's discriminatory about the Citizenship Act is that there is no way that people can rid themselves of this second-class status, no matter how close and deep their ties to Canada are. This law creates hierarchies of Canadians based on where they were born.
I was told that I would never forget that date, and boy, was he right.
As for Pete Giesbrecht, on October 17, 2017, he received his Canadian citizenship for a second time.
It means security. It means a future. It means hope for the children in a place that we are free.
If Parliament is finally able to overturn all of the age 28 rule this session, there is hope that they'll be able to tackle the second-generation cutoff rule next. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
As a superstar and a millionaire who's now in his 80s, you might think Ringo Starr would be ready to hang up his drumsticks. But the former Beatle is just getting started on his latest Canadian tour. It kicks off tonight, and it will include a show in Winnipeg. CBC's Emily Brass had a chance to sit down for a video call with Ringo Starr.
It's been 60 years since Ringo Starr first hit the stage with the Beatles, and it still hasn't gotten old.
Now, music keeps you young, keeps me up. I love it. I love to play. I've never had a day that we've said, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Sometimes it's just great, but other nights it's incredible. And I love that feeling.
The All-Star Band is playing 27 cities in 5 weeks. Pretty impressive for an 82-year-old. 8 of those stops are in Canada, including
Winnipeg. Woohoo!
Ringo has been in Winnipeg before. The Beatles' plane once touched down to refuel, their first time on Canadian soil.
I mean, the Beatles were everything in 1964, and they were starting their first North American tour, heading to San Francisco, and they stopped in Winnipeg, the middle of nowhere, and greeted the fans. And it was Ringo who said as they were going back onto the plane, "Hope to see you again."
And now 60 years later.
Exactly, 58 years later, here he comes. He's still welcome.
For Ringo, those 20 minutes on the tarmac might have been less remarkable.
I don't remember landing.
But he says he's happy to come back.
Just to freak everyone out in Winnipeg, just like the plane will land and 20 minutes later we take off. Or 21 minutes, then you'd be saying, yes, the last time you were here for 21 minutes.
Another thing that puts Winnipeg on Ringo's map is the Guess Who. Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman have both appeared in the All-Star Band.
Burton Cummings had great songs. I mean, he had great hits, American Woman and that, And Randy played fine.
Anyone who plays with Ringo has to be able to take a joke.
Worries more about his head than the music.
Generally, that's where it's at.
There's Edgar. He's sneaking about all the time.
Another prerequisite is having This tour, the all-star band, includes Edgar Winter and members of Men at Work and Toto, but one thing that never changes is the message.
Hey! We all make the world go round. You're not alone in this.
Unity is still at the heart of Ringo's music.
Some people have sent me other songs that don't quite say peace and love, and I don't do them anymore. You know, and through all these years, the main thing is peace and love.
The Canadian leg of the All-Star Band Tour kicks off tonight in Quebec with a stop here at the Canada Life Centre, October 4th. Emily Brass, CBC News, Winnipeg.
I need somebody to love. Could it be any?
What a bunch of musicians, hey? Lots of famous names there. Hey, don't forget to subscribe to our CBC Manitoba YouTube page. You'll find the latest headlines there. You can go back, watch an item you particularly liked, or send it to a friend. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. Fiona blew in and out of Atlantic Canada over the weekend, leaving a trail of destruction. At least one person was killed. Hundreds of others are displaced. Newfoundland and Labrador Premier Andrew Furey, who surveyed some of the damage today, called the devastation unbelievable. And across the region, power outages and fuel shortages are making a bad situation even worse. Alison Northcott has more.
Remnants of Josh Savory's home and belongings are scattered everywhere. His house in Port aux Basques was hit by a powerful storm surge and began to collapse.
It's weird to see your house everywhere in shambles when, you know, you're used to seeing it as it stood, nice, pristine, it was your home.
Fiona left a trail of damage across Atlantic Canada. At least one person was killed, swept away by the sea. Homes and businesses were damaged or destroyed. Thousands remain without power.
We recognize that this is not a one-day thing. This won't be a one-month rebuild. This won't maybe not even be a one-year rebuild. But we will be there for every single phase.
All of it overwhelming for Paula Keeping, who lost her home and everything in it.
You can't even tell where my house was. There's nothing there, only rock. That's it. There's no foundation, nothing.
In Nova Scotia, schools and businesses are closed. Cape Breton was one of the hardest hit areas.
32 years of owning a house and putting your heart and soul into it. And a couple of hours, it's gone.
Through it all, in many communities, neighbors are helping each other.
The communities really come together, as they always do. Cape Breton is so famous for that, and we're very thankful.
On Prince Edward Island, people lined up for gas. Officials urged residents to stay off the roads as crews clear them of debris. The province is continuing to assess the damage.
It comes as no surprise that the damage is from tip to tip and across all sectors.
The storm also hit New Brunswick and Les Îles de la Madeleine, Quebec, where some areas were evacuated during the storm, the force of it visible from the damage left behind. Residents who live where Fiona hit hardest say the storm was unlike anything they've seen before, and the extent of the damage beyond what many had imagined. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Canada will soon drop all of its COVID-19 measures at international borders. Many people are welcoming the change as Ottawa tries to adapt to the changing reality of the pandemic. But even as the travel rules are relaxed, officials are urging all Canadians to stay vigilant. Rafi Boudjikanian has the details.
We are in a much better position today than we were in 2020.
With that, the government made the case for why it's getting rid of travel-related pandemic measures. As of Saturday, no more proof of vaccination, no more use of the ArriveCan app for travelers entering Canada, and no more masking on planes or trains. Ottawa says data over the last few months has shown a key fact about the virus being brought into Canada.
It's insignificant. What explains COVID-19 now and what will explain COVID-19 in the next few weeks is a domestic situation.
The decision's welcomed by both the official opposition.
The Conservative members of Parliament, myself included, have been pressuring this government to follow medical science.
And border mayors.
This should have happened at the beginning of the tourism season, so
definitely, it's a little late, but we'll take it. We're grateful, and we're happy that it finally happened. It was the right thing to do, and now we're going to hope for a recovery for next season.
But there are still warnings.
While deaths are decreasing and ICU numbers remain low, numbers of people in hospital are slow to decline and remain elevated. With contact rates increasing and more time spent indoors this fall, we could see continued growth of this trajectory.
And Ottawa hopes people will realize the pandemic isn't over, even if nobody's enforcing the rules.
So we believe that most travelers will continue to wear those masks, but there will be some travelers who will choose not to do so, and that's all right.
Just last week, WestJet was warning it's had more than 1,000 cases of passengers refusing to wear masks. The government says it could bring back mandatory restrictions if the science points to it. Rafi Bujikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
There are hundreds of cars lined up at Russia's border with Georgia, and there are long queues at airports as more men try to leave the country, a sign of growing public resentment over last week's military call-up to fight in Ukraine. But as Chris Brown reports, some of that anger appears to be turning into violence.
Faced with the prospect of sacrificing their lives for Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, as many as 250,000 Russian men have so far said no and left, according to Russian media outlets. But it's getting harder to get out. This is the enormous lineup at the border with Georgia. We weren't allowed to walk across, said one man, and they were charging 45,000 rubles or 1,000 Canadian dollars to get in a car. Russia's secret police sent an armored personnel carrier to the crossing, prompting fears that soon the escape routes could be closed. This has scared many people. No one wants to go and die, he says. Some with no way out have turned to extreme violence. One man shot and critically wounded a recruiter at a draft office in central Siberia, and another set himself on fire to get out of being mobilized. Dagestan in the southern Caucasus has seen some of the fiercest resistance to the mobilization order, and there were more violent confrontations today. Russia's top religious figure, Patriarch Kirill, implored people not to fight the call to arms. Sacrifice, death, he said, cleanses that person of all their sins. As Putin's regime tries to force more men to the front lines, it's also compelling people in occupied Ukraine to vote, at gunpoint in some cases, in what Western nations say are sham referenda on joining Russia. Not the mobilization, nor the fake votes have visibly altered Ukraine's strategy of trying to retake land captured by Russia. Its military keeps pushing towards key objectives in Luhansk and Donbass. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
The leader of a far-right political party has claimed victory in Italy's election. Giorgia Meloni is expected to become the country's first female prime minister after the final votes are tallied. Her right-wing alliance is set to take control of both the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies with about 44% of the vote.
E fanno bene anche loro, perché noi costruiremo un governo saldo, coeso.
The Brothers of Italy party traces its roots to a neo-fascist movement that emerged in the country after the Second World War. Meloni says her party will, quote, govern for everyone. But the election results have caused concern in other European countries. Some observers are wondering whether the Italian government will maintain the country's commitments to European Union principles, laws, and ambitions. Still ahead, we'll take a look at your Manitoba forecast, and there's lots more news still to come. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. Just a few moments ago, we saw the damage that Fiona left behind in Atlantic Canada. Now, the next storm, Hurricane Ian, churning through the Caribbean, expected to slam into Florida midweek. People there are now preparing for what could be a powerful Category 4 storm.
Yeah. So they're stocking up on food, water, medicine, and fuel.
Just make sure I'm self-sufficient for a while, because I know electricity is going to go out.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has declared a state of emergency throughout the state. He's warning residents that they'll face heavy rains, high winds, and rising seawater. About 5,000 National Guard troops have been activated. Forecasters there, and they are at the National Hurricane Center over in Miami, they expect the storm to strengthen in the next 2 days to include winds of up to 220 kilometers per hour. This is the position of the storm right now, Ian, right now with winds of 160 kilometers per hour, and is moving north-northwest at about 21 kilometers per hour. The central pressure now 972. To give you an idea, comparing that to Fiona, Fiona was down around 932 millibars, so it set a new Canadian record for the lowest pressure ever seen. So right now the storm is a Category 2, and it's closing in on the western section of Cuba. So if you look at Cuba being here, Havana is about there. It'll stay west of Havana, but cross that tip of Cuba as a Category 3 storm with winds at 195 kilometers per hour. And that will happen tonight, overnight into tomorrow. And then it resurges into a Category 4. Remember, these Gulf of Mexico waters are very warm right now, and that's perfect fuel to keep this thing going. But we're looking at 220 kilometer per hour winds overnight into Wednesday morning. There's Tampa. This storm could be a Category 4, very close to Tampa. And then you notice the counterclockwise circulation. So the right side of a landfalling hurricane is where the storm surge, the winds, and the rain will be at its worst. And that happens on Wednesday afternoon with winds at about 215 kilometers per hour, and then continues onshore as a Category 1. All right, closer to home, we are at 15 in Winnipeg. Wait till you see some of the temperatures out to the west. Pretty much mid-teens here. And for this time of day, well, it just should be a lot cooler. Look at the temps out west. Melita at 23 right now, and 19 in Brandon, just 9 in Kenora. So quite a big thermal gradient between northwestern Ontario and western sections of our province. And there are the current numbers up to northern Manitoba. Forecast conditions are important. Clear skies tonight. Great for viewing Jupiter. Now, Jupiter will rise as the sun sets in the eastern sky, closest it's been in 59 years. How close? Janet's asking, how close? 591.3 million kilometers from Earth. Apparently that's close. Next time it's this close will be 4,352 years from now, so you better get out there and see it tonight. 703 kilometers closer that year. I'm getting conflicting reports on when that'll happen. One of the reports said it's about 120 years from now. Still, long time from now. All right, frost likely in all these areas. We have that frost advisory in effect, northwestern Ontario. All of this section of the province, we're looking at 1 to -1, a little bit warmer in Gimli at 5. Might see an evening shower, but not too much there. 1s and 2s in the southwest. Northern Manitoba looks like this. 4s and 5s in the west, but -3 in Thompson, so expect some frost. Of course, no advisory in the north because you would expect frost at this time of year. That will soon happen here in the south. These are the numbers for tomorrow. 18s in the west, 13 for Thompson. We're looking at highs close to 20 around Swan River, 16 in Brandon, 14 in Portage, Morden and Winkler, 15 here in the Winnipeg area. And then we just get a little bit cooler out to the east, farther from the upper ridge. 11 tomorrow in Kenora, Fort Francis, 10s for Dryden and for Red Lake.
Thanks, John.
You bet.
A mission to find seaweed brought researchers to the Arctic this month. It's estimated there are about 175 species in the region. The lead scientist calls seaweed a marine superstar because it provides a habitat for ocean creatures. It's an important part of the food chain as well. The researchers hope to determine how climate change is affecting the algae. Chantal Dubois has more.
This group of scientists have been diving in the frigid waters near Victoria Island, Nunavut, for 5 weeks. They are identifying and collecting seaweed species along with their DNA. They also hope to map and study the ecology of Arctic kelp forests around Cambridge Bay. It's an area that's been rarely studied. Dr. Amanda Savoie studies marine microalgae and is the lead on the project. This is the first time scientists have been able to observe an actual kelp forest in that area.
Kelp forests are a really important part of the coastal marine environment, and so it's really important to study, how are they doing, where can they be found, what kind of fish and invertebrates live in the kelp forest and depend on them for habitat.
ocean temperatures play a big role in where seaweed grows around the world. As waters warm, the distribution of different seaweed species changes. The Arctic and Antarctic are expected to be the most negatively affected by this. Too much warming could mean there would be no waters cold enough for this species of seaweed to grow.
We don't really know what's going to happen as the water gets too warm, but at some point it will be too warm for certain things that live here. And then things that live further south will slowly be able to move up as the temperature changes. And that will change the marine ecosystem.
Before the expedition, Savoie visited Cambridge Bay to meet with community elders. She says local knowledge have been invaluable to finding diving sites. John Lyle has been their guide. He likes to think of it as an exchange of knowledge.
I'm just happy they're involving us regular people or guides. I just take them diving to places where they want to go and get them over and back safely. Because I know most of the land around me, I think that's what they want to know, how to dive. And the more divers I get, the more I learn what's in my land.
Dr. Savoie hopes to return next year. She says this year's study will set a baseline where they will be able to compare and see the change for many years to come. Chantal Dubuc, CBC News, Yellowknife.
Beautiful pictures there. Don't forget to subscribe to our CBC Manitoba YouTube page. See all the things. The whole show is there. Your headlines, the newscast. Coming up next, one of many conversations we have, and I've tried to spit it out. We're going to talk about denialism, about residential schools, why people want to downplay its effects. We'll be right back. This Friday is Orange Shirt Day, Canada's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It's meant as a day to honor residential school survivors. Remember the children who died while attending residential and day schools, and reflect on the intergenerational trauma the schools did to families and communities. As more survivors share their stories and more evidence of tragedy and abuse surfaces, Sean Carlton of the University of Manitoba says residential school denialism is also growing. Sean Carlton, Assistant Professor of History and Indigenous Studies, joins us now. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
What do you mean by denialism?
Well, residential school denialism, to be clear, is not the outright denial of the system's existence, but is rather the strategic rejection, downplaying, or misrepresentation of basic facts about residential schooling to undermine truth and reconciliation efforts.
Why do you think it's growing now?
I think that as more Canadians are coming to terms and reckoning with the history of residential schools and settler colonialism, a lot of people see reconciliation as a threat, something that might be taking away power or privilege or challenge the way that they had been taught about their history. And rather than embracing that as an opportunity, they're seeing it as something that they need to push back against or that they can't quite square away. Church and state officials often chose to represent the system as a benevolent, humanitarian effort, when in reality, the goals of the system were always about forced assimilation, separating Indigenous children from their communities and ultimately from the land to help facilitate the process of settler colonialism and nation building. And so, education is often thought of as a good thing. In this case, education is being used as a tool of cultural genocide. And, that is hard for some Canadians to acknowledge, especially if they didn't have direct experience with it.
We had a very prominent example of this in one of our Canadian senators.
Absolutely. Conservative Senator Lynn Bayek in 2017 is a good example of someone who, just as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report was released, essentially in the Canadian Senate rose and made a speech arguing that the schools were actually well-intentioned, that they need to be understood as products of their time, that we really need to balance out the negative with the positive, all of which are key denialist talking points.
So what do you do? What's your advice for someone who might find themselves in a conversation with a denialist?
Well, I think the most important piece is to be able to understand and identify those talking points, right? And be able to push back with truth, with education. Murray Sinclair often says that education got us into this mess and education will get us out. And denialism functions on gaps in education, that a lot of people don't know the truth about residential schooling. That's why the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in part, did the work that it did, and the final report is publicly available for people to learn and educate themselves. Famously, Lynn Bayek, when she was challenged on her comments, said, "I don't need any more education." We all need more education. We're always in a constant state of learning and being able to understand the experiences of survivors and intergenerational survivors about the ongoing legacies of these schools. And it's, I think, partly, reconciliation is not an Indigenous problem. It is a Canadian responsibility. That's what the Truth and Reconciliation report says. And part of that responsibility is for non-Indigenous people like myself to push back on this denialism, to continue to create space for truth and reconciliation.
Sean Carlton, Assistant Professor of History and Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Remember, if you've been affected by residential schools, you can access crisis referral services by calling the 24-hour support line on your screen, 1-866-925-4419. Your daily lift and your 7-day forecast are still to come. You're watching CBC.
Here is your 7-day forecast. Frosty tonight, sunny and seasonal tomorrow. Winds will be light as well, a high of 15 degrees. Then we're in the 20s. However, Wednesday is windy, south 30 gusting to 50. Thursday, beautiful 21 in the sunshine. Same with Friday with a mainly sunny sky. Could see a late day shower on Saturday at 18 degrees, and then mainly sunny, 17 for Sunday. Our best chance for some rain will be Monday next week with a high of 18 degrees.